Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. This is for the third in our Collaborative Conversations webinar series on the Indian Child Welfare Act. Today's discussion is focused on active efforts, a spotlight on the St. Louis County Duluth, Minnesota Indian Child Welfare Court. My name is Lynelle Hartway. I am a program manager at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and I work in our Family Violence and Domestic Relations Department. I want to start out our webinar today by providing a quick thank you to the St. Louis County Duluth ICWA Court, the Tribal State Partnership Team, and the ICWA Collaborative, which includes our presenters and panelists today and many others. Our learning objectives for the webinar are, as a result of this webinar, you'll be better able to understand the role of collaboration and implementation of ICWA's active efforts requirements, discuss ways in which collaborative efforts have helped improve outcomes for Indian families, and identify ways to incorporate collaborative best practices into ICWA practice. As I stated, this is the third in our Collaborative Conversations webinar series. The goal of our series is to spotlight key aspects of the efforts of the St. Louis County Duluth ICWA Court's implementation of ICWA and MIFPA, with a focus on how those efforts involved collaboration between and among agencies, systems, and tribes. And to do that, the way that our panel discussion will work is we have facilitator, which is myself, and Mark Erickson, who will be joining us shortly. And we have our expert faculty panelists and our online participants. We encourage our participants to participate using the chat function. Please feel free to write in your questions at any point during the program, and I will do my best to monitor the chat and relay the questions to our panel as we have time. And we take a moment for our panel to introduce themselves. We can start with Judge Tarnowski.
Greetings. I'm Sally Tarnowski. I'm a judge of district court for the state of Minnesota. I'm chambered in Duluth, which is at the tip of Lake Superior in St. Louis County, Minnesota. We started our ICWA court, as you'll hear, back in 2014 and 15, and those that are here on the panel have been active members of it.
Thank you, Judge. Donna?
Bonjour, everyone. My Indigenous, my given name is Wolf Woman. My English name is Donna Newgren Isaacson. I work for White Earth Indian Child Welfare Department in Duluth. And I'm also the urban representative for the Duluth, or for the state ICWA Advisory Council in Minnesota.
Thank you, Donna. Dale?
Bonjour, bonjour, Badana Quadnan is the cost. Mong Nindu Dame, Manigum Missing and Dunjaba, or Misinanaqua, Manowaki, and Dunjaba. My name is Dale Greene. I'm currently employed by the McConkey Greene Law Firm as a ICWA cultural specialist, and I'm really happy to be here. Be great.
Thank you, Dale. Lynn?
Hello, everybody. My name is Lynn Braveheart. I'm Oglala Lakota from Pine Ridge, South Dakota. I work for the Guardian Ad Litem program. I'm the state ICWA division program manager. I'm also on the ICWA Advisory Council as the St. Paul urban rep. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And before we start on the content today, I wanted to take a moment and ask Dale if you would mind starting us off in a good way.
Chibana they got same on the Sagaswa. We do Kashin gay ICWA workers, ICWA court, Dijigukwe, Dega Sema Nasagaswa, we do Kishen, we do Kage, ICWA Court. Which, really short, I just thank the creator for helping. I asked the spirit Gija Gukwe to kind of help and watch over the ICWA workers in the ICWA court. I purposely invoked the Gija Gukwe. She is the first spiritual woman being that was sent to Turtle Island to watch over everything. She's the one that puts things in their proper place when we do things. In my family, she's the one that watches over women and children to make sure that they're taken care of. So I invoke her to help us here today, because I'm very proud of the ICWA collaboration that's going on. I think one of the best things that can happen is that we continue to collaborate and work together, because familiarity will overcome many of the problems that ICWA is addressing. Without that familiarity, things get lost and get overlooked. And the best interest of the Indian children and families, is better served by all of us coming together and presenting ideals to overcome those out of home placements, and more importantly, to address the issues that drive the out of home placement. So I appreciate the time you're taking to listen to me. And I look forward to hearing from all these other great minds on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And now we're going to hear from Mark Erickson. So I'm going to talk a little bit about collaborative process.
Yeah, good morning or afternoon, as it is here, everyone. My name is Mark Erickson. I work for the Center for Regional and Tribal Child Welfare Studies at the University of Minnesota Duluth. We're housed in the social work department, and there I'm a researcher and the associate project director for the Anishinaabe Bimada Zawag, which is an HHS ICWA implementation partnership project that is here in Duluth, and a lot of our work now is kind of expanded more broadly out of Duluth, is connected to other work within this state. If this is like your first time joining us for this webinar series and you're wondering why I'm here, I guess I can say that it's really because our collaborative efforts here in Duluth around the ICWA court, which started back in 2014, 2015, like Judge Tarnowski mentioned. It started largely through the relationship between our current center director here, Bree Bussey, and Judge Tarnowski. And while the parties here certainly don't need the University of Minnesota Duluth to collaborate or design system improvements, in our jurisdiction, our center's relationship with area tribes proved to be a crucial component to the process of developing an ICWA court in Duluth. And I believe strongly that this promotion of tribal involvement, collaboration, really is a crucial component to the development of the ICWA court well, I'd say any ICWA court in any jurisdiction. Judge Tarnowski cultivated those relationships at the outset before any structural changes were made to the dockets or specialty assignments within the Minnesota's 6th Judicial District. And this has remained our collaboration's commitment throughout the process. So you'll see on the screen there, nothing about us without us. And this is a theme that's been repeated by the Minnesota's ICWA Advisory Council, which Donna and Lynn talked about. That consists of tribal child welfare directors from all 11 tribes here, and then representatives from urban areas, including Duluth. And the Duluth ICWA Court has also heard this message loud and clear, including from one of our esteemed panelists today, Donna Newgren Isaacson, And we've taken steps to ensure tribal representatives are at the table in collaboration and also in court proceedings. So, like several states, Minnesota has incorporated the tenets of the ICWA into the state's codes in the form of the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act, which we all call MIFPA around here. And we know it takes a lot more than just changing the rules, but changing the culture of the court system that engages with families and tribes. So here, the ICWA court in Duluth is a dedicated docket of child welfare hearings involving American Indian children, as confirmed or presumed by the definition outlined in ICWA and MIFPA. And the court here looks different and feels different for parties experiencing it. And the court identifies needs and barriers that families and tribes experience to help guide active efforts. And I hope Judge Tarnowski will speak to a little bit about that needs and barriers conversation that comes up regularly in court. But we have identified that the active efforts requirements in the ICWA and the MIFPA are among the pillars of best ICWA and MIFPA practice here in the state. And the MIFPA is quite clear about the need for rigorous and concerted active efforts. And for us, that means that efforts put forth upfront in a case to avoid removal and eventual placement into foster care, they must be rigorous and concerted. And that has to be in the context of jointly planned and carried out with the family and tribe. So I know our panel here today will have great things to share with you about collaborative approaches to active efforts. And once again, as I've said in all of these webinars that we've done in this series, as you look for models to implement in your own jurisdictions, I really hope you get a good sense of how this group here in Minnesota in Duluth works together to implement both the letter of the law as well as the spirit behind the ICWA. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Lynelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So as I'm sure most of you are aware about some of the tenets of the Indian Child Welfare Act and its history and enactment. But just to provide a little background for our discussion today, ICWA was the result of years of hearings on the disproportionate number of Indian children in state welfare systems and the impact that that had on those children, their families, and tribes. And ICWA was created as a result of those hearings and that discussion that was held over those years, in which it established minimum federal standards. And those minimum standards were intended to reduce removal, provide stronger efforts at reunification, more efforts for kinship placements, and were seen as the best chance to minimize the trauma that those removals have had both on the individual children and their families, as well as the tribal communities. The active efforts portion of ICWA's requirements are provided in terms of a definition in the ICWA guidelines published by the Department of Interior. And those provide for affirmative, active, thorough, and timely efforts whose intent are to maintain or reunite an Indian child with his or her family. And the requirements here are focused on the level and nature of services as opposed to any specific X, Y, or Z service in any case. And they are required to be provided in order to permit a child to remain or be reunited with their families whenever possible, and also to protect against unwarranted removals. And the level and nature of services should enable parents who are or may readily become fit parents regain or retain custody of their child. And the focus of this collaborative conversation series, in addition to spotlighting efforts like the St. Louis County Duluth ICWA Court, working with the partnership team and the ICWA Collaborative, to move beyond just the minimum requirements of compliance, and instead, as Mark mentioned, looking at the spirit and intent of ICWA to implement practices, including collaborative practices that ensure better outcomes for children and their families. And this includes incorporating collaborative efforts into ensuring active efforts are conducted in each case and how those active efforts are conducted. And as Judge Francine has said here, it's a critical tool, and the ability to stop what was the intentional or negligent destruction of families and tribal nations. And then that we have our first question for our panel, which is, what are some ways where issues around active efforts can be identified, prevented, or resolved? And if we could start with Judge Tarnowski.
Thank you. So I'll take each of the questions kind of individually. I think that active efforts, issues around active efforts can best be identified by listening to what the tribes have to say. So if you've got tribal representatives at the hearing, I ask them, do you believe that active efforts have occurred in this case? And if somebody says no, or we're concerned about this particular area, then I want to dig into that further. So listening to the tribal worker, the tribal attorney, is a great way to identify any issues around active efforts. I think that prevention of issues around active efforts is really effectively done by the collaborative relationships that we've built in our court. Tribal workers and social workers really work hand in hand in our cases, and I see them having conversations. So now, instead of, I rarely hear a tribe come into the courtroom and say that there are issues around active efforts. I think that's because those conversations are being held before they get to the courtroom. So if a tribal worker and a county worker are working hand in hand on a particular case, and the tribal worker says to the county worker, hey, I really think that an active effort is needed here in getting this family, a clothing voucher or a phone or a car seat, something like that. The county workers are paying attention to that as well, and hopefully that's happening. And I'm just, I'm not seeing issues around active efforts as much as I may have in years past, I think because of that collaborative nature. And then in terms of resolving active efforts issues, nothing gets the county's attention more than a finding by a judge that active efforts are not happening. So, if we get to that stage, which, hopefully we don't, but I think as a judge, you need to be prepared to make that finding and to emphasize how important those active efforts are to the case. And if there is a situation that arises where the county really did drop the ball, you need to be prepared to make that finding. And I think that gets their attention and hopefully prevents it from happening again in the future.
Thank you, Judge Tarnowski. Dale?
Well, I'm sorry. To me, active efforts always have to be individualized for the case in front of the court, ICWA court, and by identifying, the barriers that the families are facing in the matter, and whether it's poverty, whether it's addiction, whether it's neglect, those need to be identified to be able to plan the active efforts, and resolve them. There's many things that can be identified in a different case that are different, and once the social workers are aware of the needs for keeping a family together or reunifying, then we bring those active efforts to bear, and getting a well-rounded understanding of what active efforts are and how they're identified, we'll work towards resolving them. One of the other things, with active efforts is trying to bring some sort of stability to the family, and providing services that could actually, be meaningful to bring about change with a family visible, that makes a family visible. And oh no, my internet connection is unstable. But I guess, what I think of active efforts are helping a family understand behavior that needs to be thought about and changed. And that's sometimes a difficult thing when we're dealing with addiction and ongoing poverty issues. But having the understanding of what active efforts is for individual cases is really important, and you kind of need the people to understand when I mean people is the case managers and social workers and those involved, to understand what they're looking at. And that's where this collaboration and the work that's being done here is trying to share at this particular moment.
Thank you, Dale. Donna?
Bonjour again. So I think prior to, well, even in the very beginnings of our ICWA court, we had issues on active efforts. We had cookie cutter plans. We had, we would ask the judge to order certain things. I mean, like having someone do UAs, but they don't, getting them a phone in minutes was an effort that we worked hard to make sure that our families had. And how do we identify as getting to know our families, working with the county and the families. If we have barriers, working, letting the county know. A lot of families will talk to me prior, more so than talking to the county, because I'm a tribal worker. And I'm kind of the go-between sometimes, but it's worked out really well in a lot of cases. Also getting the families to trust that the county worker is there to help them and not, prevent them from getting their kids back. So we've done a lot of work. We've had meetings. I remember the initial meetings in the ICWA court, just what's going well and what's not going well. I think when we identify barriers, the judge is really good at talking to the families about the barriers and the counties and us and how can we improve this. Right in court, she makes the families feel very welcome. She makes us all feel very welcome. When I started doing Indian child welfare work, well, over 12 years ago, us tribal workers sat in the back of the court and we weren't really asked, what do you think? And that was identified, I think, over 9 years ago, or around 9 years ago, 8-9 years ago with Judge Tarnowski in a training we had. And I remember her words were, we're going to change that, Donna, when she left. And it has changed, and it makes us all feel very part of court, which also makes us very collaborative and working on helping to improve things. So as we work together, we're more able to identify those barriers, figure out resources, and then help the family to get to places and work on things, or just a lot of individual care, I think we put into our cases these days. So it's been, I think, very positive. When I started with White Earth, we were one of the top 3 tribes with cases in St. Louis County. And I don't have that many cases in court anymore. So we have a lot of collaboration. It's been working well.
Thank you, Donna. Lynn?
Sure. To me, active efforts needs to be identified, obviously, at the beginning of a case when you identify a Native family. So that means identifying relatives, and active efforts doesn't just apply to the parents that you're working with. It also applies to the family of the parents. So the Indian custodian, grandmas, grandpas, aunties, uncles, anyone who is there to be a support to that family. Those active efforts also apply to those relatives, so that we are keeping the family intact. That's the whole purpose of active efforts, is so that we are keeping the Indian family together, the family preservation. So active efforts include the tribe at the beginning, before the case even opens, if possible, to contact the tribal nation, the social workers, to ask them what is their tribal preferences for placement. If at all possible, to prevent out-of-home placement. Minnesota has the highest out-of-home placement rate in the country for American Indian children. And the active efforts is really about looking out for the best interests of the Indian child. And the best interest of the Indian child is interwoven with the child's tribe. So if we're really going to talk about active efforts, that means we're talking to the tribe at the outset. And we're listening to them. What are the culturally appropriate services that the tribe recommends? It's not a cookie cutter case plan. Active efforts doesn't mean we just throw any old case plan at a family. I get really tired of looking at these cookie cutter case plans and having our families have to jump through multiple hoops. We want to actually balance it out and be empathetic and respectful of the families and their personal lives. And are there barriers? Are they going to lose their jobs if we make them do a service? So that's active efforts as well, is making sure that we're not causing more harm to a family by putting up more barriers. Active efforts also applies to, for an example, I had a grandma on one of my cases, and she needed her van fixed. And it was going to be a lot of money. It was about $1,500. And I did get that court ordered, because she was court ordered to take her granddaughter to several appointments. She had to drive her to therapy. She had to drive her to ballet. She had to drive her to swimming lessons. She had to drive her to school. She had to drive her to another type of therapy. So if she couldn't get there, that was directly against the court order that she had for this case plan. And so I was able to get that, the county to pay for her van to be repaired. I know that's kind of out of the ordinary, but to me, that is active efforts when we're helping our Indian families. We need to think out of the box about active efforts. Bringing in we don't always have to think about even treatment programs. In our UMD trainings with the TTCP, when we're training social workers, we talk about even asking spiritual leaders to come in and provide healing ceremonies or naming ceremonies for our families. That's thinking out of the box to provide kind of like addressing historical trauma. That can be an active effort, in my opinion. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And just a reminder, Pedro just put in the chat, everyone feel, our participants, please feel free to chime in any questions that you have in the chat, and we will relay them to the panelists. So just move on from our initial question. The determination that Congress made in enacting ICWA, it is a step towards equity. It is an intent to retain Indian children within their families and their culture as much as possible. And that includes, of course, all of the efforts necessary to place that child, either to keep the child within their family and or place them within a culturally appropriate placement. And the finding of Congress was that this focus protects the best interests of not only that child, but the tribes and the families within those communities, protecting their stability and security. And active efforts and the guidelines and regulations that have addressed this within ICWA are some of the most explicit in their requirements for their implementation within social and cultural conditions and expectations of a child's tribe. And so active efforts is a way that is more explicit than other provisions of ICWA, that how to do this correctly and in accordance with the requirements requires a partnership between and among the child, their parents, their extended family, and the tribe. And examples of active efforts and cooperation between state agencies and tribes include inviting tribes to participate in providing support services, identifying community resources, and conducting diligent searches for extended Indian family members. And with that intent of ICWA to move beyond, to move towards equity and incorporating collaboration and best practices into systems, we can help ensure better outcomes for children and their families. This obviously requires not only just moving beyond the minimum requirements, but as Judge Romero stated, not losing sight that each family is unique, and so are the customs and resources of each community that go into designing and implementing active efforts. So going back to our panel, what are some ways that collaborative measures can be built into practice when it comes to active efforts? Judge Tarnowski?
So we've done a lot in our court to promote the collaborative measures. And I expect that others on the panel will address some of those things outside the courtroom. But inside the courtroom, I try to create a model of the fact that we are there to support the family as a team or as a whole. And so at the very first hearing that I have with families, I tell them that everybody and we sit in a circle, as you can kind of see behind me, a picture of our courtroom that we use for our child protection hearings. And I'm sitting down in that area with all of them. So it's sort of a circle with square tables. So, I tell them right from the get-go that we are there to support them. Our goal is to get their family back together, to get their kids back to them, that they've got some work to do, but that we're there to help them to get that work done. And then, I really try to build trust with the family as we move through the hearings. So at each and every hearing, I ask parents, is there anything that you need? And if I've read in the reports about somebody who's struggling, for example, maybe not attending treatment or missing appointments, I'll even be a little more direct about my question. Is there anything you need? Is there something that would help you to get to treatment that we can do to support you? Do you need a ride? Do you need a phone? Is there something in particular about the time of the treatment that's interfering with things that we can change or help you with? And this is I really can't imagine this scenario of having my kids removed from me and then being in a courtroom, which is not a comfortable place to be for anybody. It's intimidating. There's a lot of people there. So we've tried to create at this table a more familiar and friendly feeling. And then I want to create trust. So if they tell me, my rides fell through. Okay, well, if somebody, then we problem solve it together. I'll ask them if the social worker or the travel worker were to call you the day before to make sure your ride was good, would that be helpful to you? Or to remind you of your appointment, would that be helpful? Yes, it would. Okay, let's turn to the social workers and see if that's a doable situation, so that we're all talking about it, putting the problem on the table, talking about it together, and problem solving it. That's the way you build collaboration. You need, and we're modeling that. So in the courtroom, that's the model that I'm hopeful is happening outside of the courtroom, where now the family understands that, hey, they can tell not only the judge, but they can tell the social workers before they get to the courtroom, I'm having trouble remembering my appointments. And they can all problem solve outside of the courtroom as well. So really trying to mindfully create these collaborative relationships. We meet, our collaborative group meets about quarterly, and those relationships are really a critical piece to the success that we've had and that our families have had. Because, when you're before we started our court, I know the county workers didn't know the tribal workers. I know the tribal, workers weren't getting phone calls about what was happening with families from the county workers. Now they sit at a table together and we have a meal together for our meetings, and we have a blessing to start us off. And we talk about what are we doing well and what can we do better. And, when you start having a meal with people, when you start seeing them and looking them in the eye, it's a lot different than simply, talking to somebody over the phone. And it's just been really compelling to see those relationships blossom and turn into a situation where in the courtroom, if I do say, if the family says I'm having trouble getting to treatment because I don't have transportation, and I turn over and look at, turn to a different side of the circle and say, well, what's going on? I see the tribal worker and the social worker looking at each other to say, well, what do you think we should do? What can we do? I can do this. Can you do that? They're talking to each other now. Those relationships, those communication pieces just were not happening before we started our court. So that collaborative, that relationship building, is really critical, and the modeling of it for the families to begin to experience a better situation throughout the process, including the courtroom, is really a critical piece.
Thank you, Judge. Dale, want to weigh in on some collaborative measures that can be built into active efforts practice?
Just by the name collaborative, what I see that works is bringing the two cultures together. When I say cultures, I mean there's a culture of the way social services is done outside of Indian country. And then there's the culture, what tribal social workers and tribal programs are doing with our population. The dialogue that happens and what we see may look totally different coming from the non-native point of view from the native point of view. You know, I tend to think sometimes early in a court hearing, a family struggling with addiction, you know, it may take them a little longer to get in line with their case plan. And sometimes, you know, having the availability of the tribal social worker that kind of understands that background from working in tribal communities a little bit. You know, I've heard tribal social workers say, you know, when we're making our case plans, we need to make sure that we're talking to the client, not the addiction, and that they understand the direction we're going. And I think to be able to bridge the two sides with the different understanding of the clients we're serving and the different viewpoint we're coming from, you know, it just adds to a better picture, better outcome. You know, sometimes, you know, maybe someone's focusing on a parent struggling with addiction, and the focus is often left. The focus is sometimes left on the parents' struggles, and we don't necessarily, I don't know how to say this, but I'll just say it this way. You know, I wrote in the chat, you know, that children have an inherent right to belong to their family, their grandparents, their community, their tribe, their band, no matter what their parents are struggling with or trying to overcome. And sometimes, you know, if we don't have the conversations that visits are for the children to stay in contact with their parents, their communities, you know, that sometimes gets overlooked because of the scene where the parent's struggling with something. But when we're having the collaborative conversations of what we want to accomplish and coming from the different disciplines point of view, I just think that makes a much better chance of a better outcome, not only for the child or children, but also the family. So thanks for letting me say that.
Thank you, Dale. Donna?
Sorry, I was answering questions. So some of the ways that we collaborate now, and I realized years back that I'm not getting calls from the social worker. I don't know what's going on. So anytime I met with a family or a child, I would email them, I would notify them and let them know. And eventually they started letting me know things. So I just kind of, I don't know, mind played them a little bit to make them more communicative. But these days, I mean, within the last few years, what we do is when the county worker emails anybody, the guardian ad litem's included, the tribal workers included. We have a group text that we use when we're contacting the families at times, so we all know what's going on. We can all help if there's a struggle with anything that they might be not able to get somewhere or something, and who's available. And then, yeah, we have a lot of conversations. We do Typically, in the beginning, we were doing family groups, safety planning, meetings, where we all got together and just kind of talked about how we can safety plan for anything that might come up, or who in the family can be that resource, or which friend of yours, your close friend that's here, what can she do to help you? So we do a lot of group collaboration these days, which has really improved the practice in St. Louis County. I'm working on other counties, but St. Louis County is about the best.
Thank you, Donna. And Lynn?
I agree a lot with Donna and whatever everybody else is saying, but collaborative to me means that's definitely about relationships. So having strengths-based relationships from the outstart of a case, especially with the tribes, you want to really trust that the tribes are the experts on their families, and trust that they know their services, they know their culture. So building those relationships and that trust, it's a sovereign nation, a nation relationship, understanding that. We can all be thankful for before we would never meet like this, right? Everything was in person, but COVID has really made us kind of switch to this online platform. And we meet like this all the time, and we can meet like this, like together and collaborate over Zoom, and even bring our families. Our families can, log in through Zoom on their phones and meet with us too. So collaborative also means bringing the family in, bringing in the mom, bringing in grandma, and having the family help hold the family accountable as well. We don't, just the social workers or tribal workers or guardians and judicial partners or whatever, we don't have to just hold the family accountable. We can also have empower the family to hold the family accountable as well. So collaboration to me really means that, as an active effort, is that deep relationship building and having it be strengths based, especially when you're when I'm talking about strengths based. When I do kind of like read over some reports, like social work reports, sometimes I get a little disheartened because when we're reading them, sometimes you just see all the bad things parents are doing, right? Like they're not succeeding, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. On the other side of that, the strengths-based part of that is like, what are you doing as a social worker, or what have you been doing with a tribal social worker or working with a guardian to address those barriers, those challenges that the family is having? So not only just documenting the challenges that the family is having, but what are you putting in place as the active effort to address and documenting that, and how well that's going, and always mentioning something that's good about the family at the outstart. Like, what are the strengths that the family has to help them overcome their barriers? I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And we did have a couple of questions come in the chat, and Donna did a quick answer online, but I also just wanted to provide an opportunity for the panel to see it. First question is, how do you approach training state caseworkers and attorneys on active efforts in a way that does not create resentment or overwhelm, but instills the benefits of active efforts? The questioner is from Texas, and they have fairly low ICWA caseloads, and they're experiencing resistance because ICWA is viewed as extra work. And so anybody, Dale's got his hand up, having some thoughts on that.
Oh, I was clapping. No, I'm just kidding. That's the great thing about the collaboration. The collaboration is a great way of exchanging understandings. I often tell people the Indian Child Welfare Act is the dominant culture's law. We in the indigenous communities have gotten really great at understanding it. And maybe that's because we have the history of what it was like before that. the collaboration gives us a chance to do exactly what we're doing now, which is exchanging useful information. Useful information that help us provide a better services to those coming through our court systems, whether they're an ICWA court, whether a child welfare court, having an understanding of active efforts. Having an understanding of active efforts is kind of the responsibility. You know, those that know me, and there's a few here that know me, you know, when I hear the non-compliance of ICWA or the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act, which is just a nice way of not following the law, saying a nice way of not following the law. I feel that if I were to go out and commit major traffic violations and showed up in front of a judge and said, I'm just not in compliance with the laws, that wouldn't take me very far, or I should maybe take me to jail, I don't know. But sharing the understandings of what active efforts are, I believe everybody involved in this meeting today is getting something of value through the creation of collaborations. And now this collaboration is able to share this in the great question of, you know, how do we, what was the question again about, you know, without making someone resentful of trying to understand what active efforts are. You know, so to me, that the active efforts are written right into the acts, you know, and I'm not being disingenuous on that. I'm really grateful that we're having these conversations to at least have the discussion on, well, families going through these hard things, you know, Congress in their wisdom wrote the Indian Child Welfare Act to provide a level of protection, and we just wanted to adhere to. And I don't think there's any of us that really want someone to have hard feelings for not understanding an act that the Indian people didn't create, but we're grateful that it's there and you're here you're here learning about active efforts and could hopefully share your understanding with those around you and your jurisdiction. But I'm sorry for my excitement. I just got really excited over the question.
Thank you, Dale. And Judge Tarnowski?
So the way that our collaborative started was with a training that was offered by NCJFCJ back in 2014. It was piloted in our jurisdiction. And the first day of, and the people that attended were every stakeholder. So we had judges, we had county social workers, county attorneys, tribal social workers, tribal attorneys, guardians ad litem, parent attorneys, child attorneys. We were all in one room. And this training was really one of the most, one of the best trainings maybe I've ever been to. It started with historical trauma and things that you know, that pertained particularly to Minnesota and Minnesota tribes, and you know, boarding schools, and you know, the treatment by the government of the Indians and tribes in our area. We had people, you know, talk about, people in the audience would raise their hand and talk about the historical trauma in their own families. It was compelling. It was really helpful to gain an understanding of what the purpose of the ICWA was designed to address. And I think that really informed people who really didn't have that any understanding at all about why the ICWA was created and what it is intended to improve. And so I really highly recommend talking to NCJFCJ about getting a training like that. And then secondly, you know, I certainly have heard the comments that you've made about this resentment of, you know, I've got to do all these extra things because it's ICWA. Well, yeah, you know, I kind of turned that around. What would you do if it was your family? Would you just do reasonable efforts if it was your family? Would you tell your daughter to go take the bus instead of driving her to treatment if she needed a ride? I mean, that's, so active efforts are rolling up your sleeves and getting in there and doing it. This is what we would do for our own families. So for you know, workers to say that it's all this extra work, you just kind of need to turn it around and you know, make them consider that it's really what we should be doing in every case. It's not, we're people. We need to treat people, like we care. That's what an active effort is.
Thanks, Judge. I believe, Mark, you wanted to chime in?
I did. I know we're short on time, but just to that specific question, you know, I was thinking as we're sitting here, you know, 40 plus years after the passage of the ICWA, and now we're kind of developing a better understanding of trauma-informed care, trauma-informed practice. And we're incorporating that into the approaches that our social services respond to families, and also in our courtrooms, as NCJFCJ is doing as well with some of their work. I kind of recognize active efforts as being trauma-informed practice, and that's always something that I consider, that, you know, the issue of removal of American Indian children was so endemic by 1978 that, you know, Congress recognized that there's this much needed approach to intervention to prevent removals and to really, you know, preserve a tribe's greatest resource, which is obviously their children. So I think if someone's struggling with active efforts and, you know, relegating it to a category of just being extra work, which we hear here as well, we need to really remember that we're addressing the effects of trauma. And I think, like that training that the judge is referencing, I think trauma is an important piece of any training you do to start to develop this understanding. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mark. And we are running up against time, but we did have a couple of questions come in concerning knowledge of membership or potential membership, where parents have been adopted out and thus don't know their specific tribal affiliation. And so there may not be a specific tribe that is known to be consulting with. And then a follow-up question about the potential for enrollment and whether or not that should be part of active efforts. Only got a couple of minutes, but anybody want to chime in and talk about how to problem solve in those issues?
I would always say talk to the tribal worker. If you have two tribes involved and you aren't able to contact the family, who does the family have the most contact with? Which tribe? Where are they closest to? Maybe Red Cliff is where most of their family is, other than, you know, another tribe. So talking to those tribal workers, finding, you know, what are their thoughts, and getting that child enrolled. I always appreciate the help when the county will help with the, you know, getting the birth certificate, and then, you know, we get the applications filled out and signed and sent out. So, but do talk to the tribal workers so that you know where to enroll.
Thank you, Donna. And let's see. So I would ask for final thoughts, but we are up against our deadline. And so first, just wanted an opportunity to point to some resources for those who are participating. A couple of NCJFCJ resources, and you can go to our general publications page, and we have our ICWA focused publications. And just recently, the Lummi Nation put out its own comprehensive guide to active efforts, and that is definitely something you should check out, and there's a link for it there. I want to take a moment to thank our panel so much for their help and their discussion today. I've always, so far on all of these, I'm just amazed at the information that I will continue to learn, and I'm so happy to hear from people who are in the field and doing wonderful things. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate all that you do. And thanks to our participants for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.